over here too. Hello, look at that. A bunch of people on already. I appreciate y'all for joining. I'll waste a little bit of time here while we wait for people to join us and find us. It's not normal for me to be on here. It's gotta be. It's not all about you. I don't know. It's not all about you. We gotta have other people too. We're on here on multiple places here. There's only 4 people on so far, and on TikTok, I don't know. We gotta wait for the people. How y'all doing? Good morning. We're gonna be talking about permaculture's most powerful tools. Look at that here on Instagram. I'm gonna put my face right in the middle of the action. Look at that. How y'all doing? Enough time yet. How y'all doing? I'm going to be on here talking this morning about permaculture's most powerful tools. Yes, that's right. Later on in the season, if you ask me, Mike, what am I supposed to do about these deer eating my garden? What am I supposed to do, Mike, about these rabbits eating my garden? Well, how am I supposed to keep my garden watered? Later on, there's not a whole lot I'm going to be able to do for you. Well, I can do things. But the real magic happens right now. Permaculture's most powerful tools. Today, I'm going to tell you about the stuff that will make your garden the most possibly weeding free, the most possibly pest repellent, the tricks that'll keep your garden from being eaten by wildlife. What you do right now, today, will make the biggest difference in what your garden is like this summer, and whether or not you get to eat your produce, or the rabbits and the deer and the bugs are going to eat your produce. What you do right now makes the difference. I thank you all for the likes and any comments and interaction. If you think there are other people out there who could benefit from not having their gardens eaten by deer and rabbits and all that, you think there are people out there who don't want to be spending their time weeding their garden or watering their garden and all that, this is the class. This is the place to be right now. For the next couple hours, we're going to be talking about this. You'd say, again, the whole point of permaculture is to solve the problems before they happen. Just got my new book, The Key to Abundance, to help design your new garden. Awesome. Well, keep that handy. Keep that great book handy. By the way, I'm very proud of all my books. My books are all actually human written. All the designs in them, the art, the photographs, they're actual real photographs. It's not AI. They're actual photographs. Hey, how you doing? I'm glad I'm going to be on here Saturday mornings for a while. In fact, let's take a look here. So yeah, this is kind of carryover from last time. We were talking about this stuff. Now I'll show you my schedule coming up. I've got a whole schedule of cool stuff that's going to be happening over the next few months. And so you can know when to join. Here, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to find it. I am going to find it right now. We're going to look at that right now. Because I say so. It's just as simple as that. I can't show it on Instagram. But if you're over on Instagram, I actually posted this to my stories. So you can find it in my stories, my schedule. And I'll post it again. I'm going to post it as a post. So you can always go back, find the schedule for the next few months. Now we're going to be talking about tree systems coming up. Oh, next week starting Tuesday and Saturday is one of my favorite classes of all, Pattern Genius. These two guys up here in the top right, a lot of people, David Holmgren and Bill Mollison, maybe you've seen Jeff Lawton online. People see these permaculture people and they see them talking about gardening, about farming, and they think, man, these guys are geniuses. How do they get to be such geniuses about this stuff? And there is a secret built-in trick for that within permaculture, which is the pattern language concept. And permaculture is a pattern language-based design system or solution for gardening. It's a tool to help you have a better garden, a better life, and it functions by using this pattern language concept. And pattern languages are really cool because they're and we'll talk about them more next week, because it's a way that is a research-based way to convey information that really quickly increases people's ability to do design type problems. So in fact, there are studies even with like designing jet airplanes, right? And because they wanted to find something that would be really complicated, that like lay people would not have any idea how to do it. And then they subject people to a pattern language for jet plane design for a brief period of time and make a huge increase in how much they're able to make and design jet airplanes. Probably their jet airplanes wouldn't fly, but they were objectively better than the people who were like given a textbook or watched a video on the subject and all of that. So and pattern languages are really good because they help you organize your thinking based on common problems that you might have. So today as we go through, you'll see I'll be talking about a bunch of the kinds of problems that we have in our garden and how we can solve them. Hope I'm feeling better. I'm feeling a little bit better. The voice is still a little bit rough here this morning. I had quite a doozy of a thing. You know, I didn't feel terrible. Who did they learn from? They essentially made it up as they went. To be quite honest, the beginning of their course, Bill Mollison had actually grown up in kind of like an old school horticultural village in Tasmania. So they did low intensity farming, and it was a very enclosed, kind of closed loop village. So everybody lived really close to the land. You know, they had a baker, everybody did gardening, everybody did farming. They did forms of forestry there and forestry products. And so that's kind of how Bill Mollison started out. David Holmgren's parents were like previous generation back to the landers. He described them as communists, and they wanted to get away from society. So he grew up kind of doing gardening too, but he saw that it was fundamentally unsustainable. And there was no way to make it. People were practicing permaculture long before these guys' ancestors set foot here. That's true. You know, I would say they weren't practicing agriculture or permaculture. I'd say they were practicing something better. I would say they were practicing indigenous agriculture or indigenous horticulture, indigenous horticultural systems. And part of this is because the reason why I like to point that out and say it that way is because I don't think permaculturists should be going around colonizing indigenous agriculture and indigenous programs. So if I look at the Native Americans and the kinds of agricultural things that they were doing here on this continent before my ancestors came here, for the most part, some of my ancestors were Native Americans, but before my European ancestors came here, if I were to say they were doing permaculture, and it's the same as permaculture, it's kind of like planting the permaculture flag in something that really wasn't permaculture and was its own complete different thing. If I look at the main set of tools that we use for permaculture, we're trying to design something that is similar to what in terms of its sustainability, to what indigenous people did. But indigenous people evolved their approach to agriculture and indigenous systems and indigenous lifeways. A good term for that is tech, indigenous tech, traditional ecological knowledge. And they evolved that over millennia and came through of indigenous science, of trying things, seeing if they worked. What we're trying to do with permaculture is fast forward that using the best tools that we have today. And those tools come from science, modern science, the European tradition, and indigenous lifeways and systems from around the world can be very inspiring to us, and we can use them for inspiration. But when it comes down to the practical systems that most of us are going to use, because we live in European-style houses, in European-style communities, in European-style yards, most of the things that I will teach you about actually come from the scientific tradition and the European tradition. And I always try to include a few indigenous things just so that we can promote the value of indigenous tech and stand in solidarity with the indigenous people alive today who are trying to maintain their own lifeways and trying to rebuild their lifeways and trying to treat that as something of value and be valued. So it's very important for us as permaculturists to always stand in solidarity with that and promote indigenous lifeways and indigenous people and try to stand in solidarity with their struggles and with their history and all of that. Indigenous people, according to the UN, are actually our #1 protectors of ecosystems and of biodiversity. They say that indigenous people on a very small percentage of the worst, most marginal land actually steward and save more biodiversity than all of the universities, all of the parks, all of the governments in the world that take up much larger spaces and way more land. So if you care about the earth and you care about biodiversity and you care about maintaining forests and maintaining wetlands and all of that, then we should care and protect and stand in solidarity with indigenous people because they're the great protectors of all of that. So, but I also like to be very careful to not appropriate the terms of indigenous peoples and their knowledge and their authority. If I were to say that these two guys got all of their ideas from indigenous people, I would be lying to you. I would be using the idea of indigenous tech and wisdom in order to sell something and promote something that really came from other sources. Bill Mollison wrote a book that I've talked about for the Permaculture Designer's Manual. We'll see some ideas from it here at the bottom of the screen. And you could say, and he did, in fact, the cover of the book is an indigenous symbol taken from the indigenous Australians that he was working with later on in his career. And because he actually, as a person who stood in solidarity with indigenous people, he actually he was the first scientist, or he was the scientist, who, it was thought that Tasmanians had a complete genocide, that there was a complete genocide of indigenous Tasmanians. And so Bill Mollison actually did the studies and the research and looked back at all this information. And he is the guy who who went around to the survivors of the Tasmanian genocide and reconnected them together and documented their history, and was able to come up with a list and a group of people and reassemble the Tasmanian indigenous population and put them in contact with each other. So he actually is the guy who did that and kind of recreated the indigenous community. To being people in permaculture circles, thank you for explaining this to me in a detailed way that's been something I have an aversion to being in permaculture circles because people misrepresenting. Oh yeah, you know, it's a really tough line to balance, where and I think that Bill Mollison got it spot on. Again, as a person who spent his scientific career in part as an ally and advocate to Indigenous people and Indigenous Tasmanians, he, I think, made his best effort to get that sort of thing right. With the Permaculture Designer's Manual, when he introduces his set of permaculture principles, he says that all of those scientific principles can also be found in the indigenous wisdom of the world. So he wanted to make sure that we reference that and that we promote that idea that those things exist in indigenous circles. But then he also, because it's a scientific-based book, and because there is no book out there of indigenous permaculture, at least there wasn't at that time. There have been a couple of attempts more recently to produce that, but there was no book that you could go to. There was no permaculture design course of indigenous, there was no indigenous agriculture design course or anything like that. So he went to the scientific literature and cited scientific sources for all of his permaculture design principles. And then he would try to use models from indigenous societies and places that he had gone to, because he, again, he wanted to stand in solidarity with indigenous people. In fact, their thesis statement, the thesis statement for the Permaculture Design Manual and the Permaculture Design Certificate course, and this is really interesting, lack of privilege of the people who could write it. There was also not wanting to have their technology and their ideas just exploited by people who didn't actually care for it. You know, people who were indigenous around the world through the history of colonialism became pretty used to Europeans and white dudes showing up and offering to help, and then basically taking their stuff and their ideas and then taking it back and then selling it. So the Permaculture Designer's Manual always tries to put forth ideas from indigenous societies. He always specifically cites the indigenous culture that the idea is taken from, and he's very careful in always citing the indigenous people and the experts who he learned those things from. Another thing that he did, and that he talked a lot about in his PDC, and it's a fine time to talk about this here today, is he always would say that as permaculture designers, if and when we go to places in the global south or work with indigenous communities, we should never tell them what to do. And he always said that, so he said that he never wanted to be yet another white guy showing up and telling indigenous people what to do. Because what happened was that white people showed up and told them what to do and messed everything up. It destroyed their traditional indigenous life ways, replaced it with forms of agriculture and that didn't work for their local ecosystem and their life ways, and usually made a whole wreck of things. So what Bill Mollison said he would do is he would go to those communities, usually in the global south, where and instead of telling them what to do, he said he would show up and say, okay, how do we do this? How do we fix this? how did things used to be done here before white people came and messed it all up? Before colonizers, I should say colonizers, before colonizers came and messed it all up. You teach me your, what memory you have of your indigenous systems here, and let's try to recreate those. So that was a lot of what Bill Mollison did, was going to people and trying to empower them. And because in a lot of cases, the local people have been taught that their ways are backwards and they don't make any sense, and that they're uncivilized, and that the colonizers brought them this great civilization and they should be very thankful for it. And then a few decades later, the ecosystem is all dead, the soil is dead, their previous system of relative egalitarianism has been replaced by these strong hierarchies. One or two people now own all the land and everybody else is a serf. So that kind of agricultural system that we exported was really great for creating a tax base, making a local warlord rich, and helping the colonizers create a population that they could keep much more easily divided and conquered. But it was terrible for the people who lived there and made a total wreck of their food system, their diets, their health, their communities. So when Bill Mollison came, he was trying to, and he always said, the goal then is to re-empower people. And this is interesting because it was something I was taught also in an anti-colonialism course and in an anti-racism course, that oftentimes the best thing that white people can do is use their white privilege to re-empower people of color and indigenous people. And I think Bill Mollison didn't have that language yet, but he got it exactly right, because he would say, they feel like their ways were backwards. So when I show up and I tell them, wow, the way you used to do things made a lot of sense. It had deep ecological wisdom to it. Let's see if we can recreate that. Keep the best of your new life ways, the things that you like now, and also rebuild the things that used to make your communities work well. So in that sense, and then the other thing that he did is Bill Mollison always said, he never wanted to create a single permaculture centralized unit that would then be the Bill Mollison organization that would go and do work in the Global South. This is another thing that I think Bill Mollison just absolutely nailed, and he was decades ahead of things like, there's a great paper on this written by an African-American man who worked in community development in the Global South. And the title of it is The White Savior Industrial Complex. And Bill Mollison didn't have those terms yet, but Bill Mollison had already seen the White Savior Industrial Complex, that people from the Global North would create organizations, get donations from wealthy people in the North, and then go to the South on vacation, do a little bit of work, have a nice vacation, and come back up north, and live off of, take a paycheck of $200,000 a year from the donations, take a big group of people who are philanthropists and donors on vacation, and they go and they have a lovely time. And then when they leave, nothing has changed, nothing is fixed. And that's the White Savior Industrial Complex. And it works really great for the people running the nonprofits. But Bill Mollison was already a critic of that. And he said, we don't want to repeat that. So what permaculture does, and what he taught permaculturists to do in his Permaculture Design Certificate course and in the Permaculture Designer's Manual, is he said, we don't centralize and start schools and start organizations to do work in the Global South. We go there one or two times to help people in the Global South start their own organizations. Exactly. You look at Bill Mollison versus Bill Gates, and you have two exact opposite examples, right? So Bill Mollison really wanted to do like the exact opposite. So when he went down there, he would try to find people and empower them, the people who had the great passion for their indigenous ways and for their indigenous agriculture, and he would try to connect with them and say, okay, let's let's start a new thing. I'm going to teach you what's in the permaculture design certificate course. We'll learn about pattern languages. You teach people how things used to be done here. We're going to evaluate these systems, figure out how to teach people these systems, because nobody had ever taught those indigenous systems before. They were just like culturally inherited over generations, right? So they had to recreate that kind of thing. And then you start the organization. You be the head of the organization. You don't work for me. You're not going to keep paying me to come back here. You be the teacher. You be the organizer. I'm going to put you in contact with donors from the global north to fund your own thing here. And you be the teacher. So then those people would end up being featured in like the Permaculture Designer's Manual when he wrote that book. So he would talk about some of these indigenous types of systems as models that we in other places can aspire to in terms of their sustainability. Well, a lot of these things, like you may have heard of chinampas, the famous floating gardens around Mexico City. Extremely sustainable. You grow gardens basically in compost piles, loose compost piles built in the side of a lake, and it creates a wetland kind of system where the lake, it actually helps to clean, the agriculture there helps to clean the water, make the water cleaner, reduce mosquitoes because it sucks up the nitrogen, and then at the same time that nitrogen gets used to grow food in a way that is beyond sustainable. One of the most sustainable ways we could ever grow food, that humans have ever figured out to grow food. Well, that's an amazing example, but I do not have a lake in my backyard or a river. So I cannot do that example, but I can aspire to the same sort of sustainability. So when we look at the suite of technologies that permaculture in the real world teaches in North America, if I were to make a top 10 list of the things that most permaculturists do in North America, unless somebody is doing a Three Sisters garden, which I always recommend because I want to promote a connection and solidarity with indigenous people. So one of the reasons why I try to promote Three Sisters, and I always make all of my content on Three Sisters 100% free. So if you go to my website, any of my content, any of my designs and garden designs for Three Sisters Gardens, because that is an indigenous technology that I have learned about from indigenous people, oftentimes at the Firekeepers Food Summit I learned a lot, and from other indigenous friends who were interested in agriculture and who taught me about this. Another one is Jane Mount Pleasant. I've learned a lot about Three Sisters from reading deeply on Jane Mount Pleasant's studies. So as someone who has inherited that information for free, I never sell it. And that's another thing that Bill Mollison also tried to do. Anything that was indigenous like that was freely offered to him, he always offered in kind for free. So just some nice ways, since we are dealing, and I really appreciate you bringing up the whole topic, because as we are talking at this intersection of foodways and ancient foodways, in some cases, it's really important to be very mindful of cultural appropriation and set out to have these kinds of conversations in ways that we call people into solidarity with indigenous people without appropriating indigenous tech. That's always been a big topic within permaculture for that reason. So I really do appreciate you bringing that up. But yeah, when we look at the main things that I recommend and talk about, these are things that have a huge cultural tradition within Europe, like hedgerows, and French intensive style gardens are really big for people. Keyhole style gardens are actually an invention of Bill Mollison himself. Yeah, it's well, thank you. I appreciate that too. It's something that I appreciate with Bill Mollison is the fine line and the balance between promoting indigenous knowledge in terms of solidarity, but not planting the permaculture flag in it and recolonizing it and appropriating it and repackaging it as permaculture. So if you look at the Permaculture Designer's Manual, about 1/3 of it is about specific agricultural techniques and gardening techniques. Of that 1/3, maybe another third at most are things that come from indigenous cultures. And some of that also existed in indigenous Europe too. So some of it was just the same as when Bill Molson goes to South America, he said, well, I'm not going to tell South Americans what to do. I'm going to ask South Americans how they used to do things before centuries of colonialism messed it all up. And so same thing with Europe. He, really promoted the same idea of, well, what were things like in Europe before the Romans colonized all of Europe and converted it all to Roman style agriculture, agrarian civilization, and the answer there is that Europe was largely a giant hazel, walnut, chestnut kind of food forest too. And there were broad areas of food forest and then livestock from Asia. Europeans didn't really domesticate any livestock, but very early on they were brought in from Asia. And Asian livestock were kind of cultivated or allowed to be semi-wild within food forest type systems that were called pannage lots. That relationship is also important. Just as farming has been a tool of colonialism, 100%. Farming is probably the biggest tool of colonialism. And so as we try to talk about decolonizing the world, this, I think, what Bill Molson really dug into there and discovered was that asking people, how do we recreate your indigenous lifeways, or the best of your indigenous lifeways? And there's also a thing here too, where most indigenous people, want to progress too. Most indigenous people want to find ways to progress into the new world. Everybody loves the internet. We wish that it was less authoritarian dominated, but the whole idea that I can be on here and talk to people around the world and meet people around the world is really cool. There are a lot of cool things that we have progressed to as well. And in a lot of cases, that wasn't because of white dudes or European culture. It was a global effort that has brought us to where we are right now. So the question is really, permaculture is not about going back to the past. It's not about re-indigenizing in that way. But as Bill Molson put it, the thesis statement of the Permaculture Designer's Manual, the most important paragraph that he himself identified as the key paragraph in this whole 1,000-page tome. The Permaculture Designer's Manual is huge. And he said the most important paragraph, the most important sentence is that the whole point of this is to re-indigenize, is that in order for the world to continue and survive and become better, that we must all adopt sophisticated Aboriginal worldviews. Now, that doesn't mean going back and living like hunter-gatherers and burning down all of our houses and not having an internet or all that, but it's about how do we integrate the best of our technology and keep what is life-enhancing while also rebuilding and regrowing the things that used to make us sustainable and that used to fill our lives with connection with nature and with connection to each other and with connection to community and those best parts of our indigenous lifeways. Can we build a tapestry that brings us back into connection and concert with the earth itself and with nature, while also figuring out ways to maintain the best of what we've gained in terms of other technologies. That's kind of the whole, like the big vision goal of permaculture. And unfortunately, we are to a place where our systems are really completely unsustainable and causing a lot of damage. Uh, and when I say unsustainable, it doesn't just mean that it's bad for monarch butterflies and dolphins. It means that literally our lifeways cannot be sustained into the future. We have no idea how to keep what we are doing right now going on into the future. So we're going to have to change in some ways. And this whole the whole idea of and we could, if you want to talk about one thing that Bill Mollison always pointed to about indigenous societies is that almost all of them have evolved sophisticated worldviews about sustainability and about living within natural balance. Because if they didn't, they knew their whole society would go into decline and fail, and that their grandkids would no longer be around. And this is when we have this idea of like seventh generation thinking, right? Thinking 7 generations ahead means you have to live in balance with the ecosystem now. Because if you destroy the ecosystem, if you hunt off all the megafauna, then the future generation has nothing to eat, right? So this was part of that evolved indigenous knowledge, this tech, and a sophisticated Aboriginal worldview is the way Bill Mollison wrote it in the designer's manual. And he said that if we're going to have a future, that we must all redevelop these sophisticated Aboriginal worldviews. And that doesn't mean appropriating indigenous tech, but it doesn't mean that we all have to live exactly the way indigenous people did in our region. We're going to find different tools. But this core, an appreciation for this core idea of living sustainably in balance with our ecosystem is really the key. And a focus on a relationship and reciprocity with the land, not extraction. 100%. I love the way you put that. That's really well put, really well worded. So I hope for the person who was asking and bringing in this topic, which is really appropriate to the conversation today. Plantastic. I hope that that this discussion helped understand this discussion, this broader discussion of the role of indigenous tech within permaculture and our conversations around cultural appropriation and all that. By the way, my books all include discussions of cultural appropriation. Because if you're going to talk about this kind of topic, it becomes so important to talk about cultural appropriation and respect of indigenous cultures very deliberately and explicitly. So all of my books have like chapters and sections on this. I'm a person who thinks you really can't write a gardening book in today's world without discussing the topic specifically. Hey everybody, thank you for joining me. We're talking today about permaculture's most powerful tools. It's unfortunate that the idea of toxic empathy is diametrically opposed with such great ideas. This is crazy to me that we right now have come up with this idea of that empathy can be toxic, because all of the world's wisdom traditions, all of our great spiritual traditions, all place empathy as one of the great one of the great gifts, one of the greatest things in life, one of the keys to becoming a balanced, realized, self-actualized person. And it's also the key to being a good gardener. You know, a lot of what I talk about is like try to empathize with nature, try to empathize with the beings in the ecosystem so that you're not exploiting them. Try to think about your own garden in a seventh generational sense. You know, a lot of indigenous cultures will also have a saying like, "Who speaks for the wolf?" I would disagree that culture is appropriation. I would say that culture, there's a difference between cultural appropriation and cultural syncretism. Cultural syncretism is cultural sharing, and cultural syncretism and cultural sharing are beautiful and always good. That's how we grow as people and as societies and as cultures, is sharing and playing together and respecting each other's cultures. Cultural appropriation is a different thing. Appropriation, in the sense, means theft. It means stealing something. And I do believe that there is such a thing, and it's, you know, it's very context oriented, and almost everyone, when you explain the difference, they're like, oh yeah, there's a huge difference between cultural syncretism and cultural sharing and cultural appropriation. Yeah, we'll talk about it. This is an important topic. We're here at the start of a permaculture design certificate course, online. Parts of it are going to be free. I'm going to be talking about the schedule in a little bit. So why not spend some time to talk about this? Also, today we're talking about permaculture's most powerful tools, which are the overall big design tools. So talking about this kind of topic really fits well into this discussion today. So I appreciate all these questions. I appreciate that you've moved this conversation in this direction. I like this. The difference between cultural, see if you can spot the difference between cultural sharing and cultural syncretism. Let's say, just to make things make things very clear, we don't want to we want to move the conversation to a 10,000 foot view. Now, we're looking at us from a 10,000 feet view. We might as well imagine there are aliens. Yes? So let's say aliens come here. Hey, I appreciate you. I appreciate you too, and I appreciate the thanks and the gratitude. So aliens come here, and they show up, and they say, wow, you know, we're here to rescue you humans from yourself. We've been watching things, and you don't seem to have any idea how to manage this planet Earth. Now, we're going to come here and gently help you out. And if you don't want us to, that's fine. We're just going to exterminate the planet then and use it for ourselves, since you're doing such a terrible job of it. So, of course, the humans have to say, okay, well, that sounds like a deal we can't say no to. So the aliens come here, and they take over. For our own good, of course. The aliens begin to really take a liking to Earth jazz. I like Earth jazz. Jazz and blues. The aliens think that jazz and blues are just the best things. So the aliens come to some of the best human jazz and blues musicians, and they say, teach us your ways of jazz and blues. And then the first alien jazz and blues musicians, hey, I appreciate you. Loving this insight into your belief system. You've earned a big fan today. Looking forward to continuing to learn as I start my own gardening journey. Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to be back here every Saturday at this time, and usually we're going to be talking gardening topics. These are important topics that we're talking about here today too. I am going to move on in a few minutes to gardening stuff. We're going to get into some gardening topics, because what you do right now in the garden is going to be the most important thing, the most powerful thing you can do to prevent pests and weeds and wildlife problems, watering problems this summer in the garden. What you do right now is the key to that. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to try to at least give you a few big, great gardening tips that you can use this year. And if you gotta go, then if you're on Instagram, this whole video will be posted to Instagram. You know, I'll probably try to post it on TikTok too. We'll see. Um, so so check back and watch the rest. Share it with friends if you like. So anyway, the aliens love blues and jazz, and a couple of them come around and start music shops selling uh, earth instruments, antique earth instruments that they've basically stolen. They steal all the good instruments from the earthlings and then they sell them to other aliens. And they sell them for, what would be the equivalent of millions of earth dollars in the alien economy. And then they set up lessons and they teach each other about the blues and about jazz. And none of this appreciation, none of the money ends up making it to earthlings, right? The earthlings don't get any of this money. And there's this whole economy of using and of alien individuals thriving and becoming millionaires and billionaires off of this earth cultural asset. Within that kind of system, and then food too. They decide they really love earth food. There's nothing better to the aliens than a burger and pizza joint. And so they open a bunch of burger and pizza joints, and then they get earthlings to make the food, and they pay the earthlings minimum wage. The earthlings have to cook the food, they barely make any money, but the restaurateurs, the aliens who are operating the restaurants, end up being billionaires off of this cultural technology that they've taken kind of from the humans. Can you see how this causes resentment and how this could cause some resentment? And then especially if it's done without respect, so that the alien restaurant, they end up having caricatures of humans as they think that we're really stupid and silly looking. But we're great at jazz and food, so jazz and burgers. So all the burger joints have these really disrespectful images of humans looking real stupid and making their food for them. And so, we could kind of get this idea and understand why there's a difference between that thing and the aliens actually coming to us and offering to share their technology, offering to share culture, not trying to take us over, not trying to control us. And then, instead of just stealing American culture or Earth culture and starting their own restaurants, they could be like, hey, do any of you humans want to come to our planet and start a burger joint? You will be so rich if you do, right? And allowing them to communicate and trade and be part of an economy as equals. These are very different things. So there's a huge difference between cultural sharing and cultural syncretism, and forms of doing it that cause resentment and that feel unfair and that feel like theft, right? And there's another thing too. Three Sisters. Earlier today, I mentioned that whenever I share Three Sisters information, and some of it appears in my books, so you can buy that information from me with other things. But all of my Three Sisters stuff and designs, information and designs, are also available for free on my website because I receive them for free. So if the aliens came and they said, hey, Earthlings, teach me the blues and jazz, and the Earthlings taught the aliens blues and jazz for free, and then one of these aliens goes back and starts a YouTube channel on his planet dedicated to teaching people blues and jazz, and he starts a course, and he becomes a billionaire doing it. As the person who taught him for free, wouldn't you feel ripped off? Wouldn't you feel resentful of this? Doesn't that seem unfair? Especially if the aliens are subjecting your whole culture to oppression and you're all living in poverty, and the aliens are becoming rich off your resources, including your cultural and spiritual knowledge and things like this. So I do understand how this can... I'm located in Indiana now, by the way. So the Earthlings are still viewed as primitive, with just some lucky cultural specialties. Exactly, exactly. And so so the whole point of this is just I wouldn't ever want to make somebody feel resentful that I was stealing their culture and that they weren't being rewarded for it or whatever. And so it's just good to try to be respectful of the whole idea, and to be and to do it with respect, and to do it as sharing in a way with equals, and to not do those kinds of things I was talking about that look like theft and that cause resentment. So, I think that we can understand there's a difference between cultural syncretism and sharing, between equals in a respectful way, and cultural appropriation that is theft. And one is very, very good and the other one is not good. Giving knowledge for free is a blessing. It sure is. I sure agree with that. So, and I try to make as much available for free as I possibly can, while also still paying myself to be able to offer classes and to be able to spend my time sharing this information, and doing it at a high level as a professional who tries to be mindful of all these sorts of things that we're talking about. So, I really appreciate this discussion. And thank you so much for asking those questions and bringing things into that space. No, yeah, and just even beyond capitalism, making a living isn't a crime. Uh, Sometimes we in the kind of like hippie, environmentalist, and in certain leftist kinds of circles, we get this idea into our heads that making a living at all, making any kind of money, is bad. And of course, we get that idea because it's done so destructively within our current system. So we see it being done in a really exploitive way, and we don't want to be replicating that ourselves, which is good. And so we'll get the idea that that means that we should all just go and die in a gutter poor, because making any kind of money at all in this world is inherently evil. Um, one time I was at an event, and I was actually presenting and promoting a bunch of materials and giving away things for free, giving away free books actually, and information, and doing a free presentation, all just for free, as a donation. And I talked to a woman afterwards, and I mentioned my business. I sell plants, I sell information, I sell classes. I make a big part of my money selling plants and produce and seeds. And this woman said, "Wait, you're a for-profit business?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And she turned around, right, and she said, "You're not nonprofit?" And she turned around and walked away from me right then, just turned her back on me, because she thought that making money was some kind of a crime. This was a woman who was probably 50 years old, but got this really negative idea about people making money in this world. She probably does herself. She probably works for a corporation herself. And so we often get this idea. But here's the thing: every being on this planet pays its way. Every being on this planet earns a living in different ways. Every being on this planet contributes positively to its ecosystem, and competes for resources, and earns its way in this world. Every being in this world invests in the future, for its own future and for future generations. It takes energy from its life now and does activities that will grow in value for itself and its ecosystem into the future. We all invest. We all earn our way. And there's nothing wrong with that. You, as a being, as an earthling on planet Earth, are entitled to thrive. You're not entitled to harm and exploit other people in negative ways, right? Everyone else is entitled to also live without you harming them. And we're all entitled to live without other people harming us. But within that, we're entitled to thrive. We're entitled to grow and have great, beautiful lives. And to invest in non-harmful ways in making sure that our own lives and the lives of future generations will be beautiful and full and meaningful and wealthy in the truest sense, right? Or she benefits from someone else's participation in capitalism. Yeah, exactly. So, we all have to do it. We all have to do it. And the idea is to do it in ways, within nature. We used to have this idea of nature as being a jungle and pure competition, and every being in the jungle in nature is in fierce competition, trying to exploit others in a competition to create dominance hierarchies, right? This is this whole idea. And within that mindset, empathy is toxic. Caring about those people that you want to use and step on and exploit in order to build your own wealth in the way of the forest, in the way of the wild, as the way of human nature. This is the way we used to think about nature. We know now this is all pseudoscience BS. That's not how beings in nature work at all. Every being in an ecosystem cooperates. Cooperation dominates in nature instead of pure competition. In fact, there's a whole science on this. In our view, and permaculturists talk about this a lot, the good ones do, we tend to think that there's a binary, competition and cooperation. And you can either be cooperative or competitive. But in the real world, that's not how it works. We actually have, and scientists developed language for this. So there's cooperation and there's competition, and between them, there's cooperation and comparation. A mix or blending of competition and cooperation. So we can actually compete with each other in ways that are mutually beneficial. Think about, and a good example of this is if you have a workout partner, if you have a writing partner, or a gardening partner, and you use a little bit of competition with each other to motivate each other, right? When you go and you have a workout, maybe you push each other a little bit harder, and maybe you do an extra couple of reps or stay on the treadmill an extra minute because you want to stay just that much longer than your friend. And you have this friendly competition going, and it can help egg each other on and be like, hey, are you going to the gym today? Even if you don't feel like it. You don't want to tell your friend that you don't feel like it and you feel tired. You're going to go to that gym and you're going to show up your friend because that's the way it works. And even in healthy business communities, good business communities can actually provide better services through helpful forms of competition. So not all competition is necessarily bad. We can have healthy levels and forms of competition that actually are mutually beneficial and beneficial to the community. So we could call that comparation, is the term that scientists use for it. It's not a pure form of competition. It is cooperative competition. And then we have cooperation, but we can also have negative forms of cooperation. We can have competitive forms of cooperation. And within the social sciences and within people studying this, this is actually the most negative thing. So you can have competition that can be at a level that is bad for society and that harms people. When you allow your competitive urge to go into a form of domination where you exploit people and you appropriate things and you harm people in order to raise yourself up, that's a negative form of competition or pure competition. That's no good, right? That's competition out of balance in a way that's socially destructive and destructive to us. We shut ourselves off from empathy, that gift that all the spiritual traditions teach us about. But you've probably experienced the opposite if you've ever been around people. A lot. In fact, there's a whole form of narcissists, of malignant narcissists, who are called pro-social narcissists. And pro-social narcissists want to be seen as these selfless, caring, giving people who will give you the shirt off their back. That is what feeds their narcissism, is being seen in that kind of way. And so this is could be the toxic giver syndrome. There's a lot of different ways that you may have met somebody. A lot of people will have a family member like this who always shows up and they're trying to be seen as this benevolent giving person, and they self-sabotage and they don't have good boundaries for themselves, and then they end up super resentful of other people when other people don't appreciate how selfless and how giving they are. Within an organization, these people can become very toxic and actually cooperate competitively in ways that are the most destructive to the social fabric. So scientists would actually say that in that sense, an out of balance cooperative thing that is competitive or cooperation is more destructive than competition or comparation. So I really love this whole way of viewing things. And this is the way things are in ecosystems. And within ecosystems, you usually do not have that destructive form of cooperation. We have good cooperation and we have good competition. Every being, every being in an ecosystem competes in ways that help the whole of the ecosystem, that invest in making the ecosystem better. So it's good for us to think about this. And when we look at our own gardens, when we look at our ecosystems, to try to be that way. In ecology, the term for a being that contributes heavily to the ecosystem and makes the ecosystem better for all to such an extent that it actually determines the community makeup, such as an oak tree. An oak tree produces acorns that feed so many beings. They're great photosynthesizers. So they photosynthesize so much light. They build the soil. They're great at building the soil. They feed all sorts of beings with their leaves. When their leaves fall, they build the soil and they feed soil organisms. Oak trees provide so many benefits to the ecosystem that they create a whole set of beings that are attracted to oak trees. We call that kind of species a keystone species, a species that is so beneficial to the ecosystem that it creates its own little ecosystem. Now, within permaculture, and again, this is one of these ideas of having and developing a sophisticated Aboriginal worldview. Almost all Aboriginal societies have ways of thinking and talking about how we act as keystone humans, how we can be humans that don't exploit and destroy the environment, but build the environment for all, because that's true wisdom. When we invest in creating a world that will be abundant and rich and beautiful for ourselves and for all of the beings around us, this is true wisdom, right? Let me ask you a question. Which is wealthier? Would you rather live in an ecosystem or in a community? Let's say you could be a wealthy person in your community, but would you rather be the wealthiest person in your community and have everybody else around you live in poverty? For example, do you want to be the person who owns all the land and owns the factory, and everybody else works for you, and they all make minimum wage and can barely feed themselves, and they all live in poverty, and you live as a rich person within that community surrounded by poverty? Or would you rather live as a person amongst equals, where everybody is wealthy and everybody has their needs met and everybody has the time and resources to write and be yeah, exactly. Who wants to live that way? Would you rather live in a community where everyone is equal and everybody can live up to their full potential? Everyone has time and resources to have a path of self-actualization, to grow, to create culture, to invent, to progress, to teach, and be full humans? which kind of community would you rather live in? Which one defines true wealth? Is the person who lives wealthy at the expense of everybody else and then has to live in a community of poverty that's impoverished, where when they go out of their house, they have to see people living on the street. They have to see people living in poverty who can't feed themselves, and they have to know that they live a life of wealth and privilege at the expense of those other people. Do you want to live that way, seen as that person, or do you want to live as one person who's upraised and uplifted within a society where everybody can achieve their full potential? The second one, for sure. Enough abundance so that helping our fellow man becomes the default. Absolutely. What a beautiful, to me, that's true wealth. And by the way, I'm not alone in this. There's a researcher, I write about this in my books, and a few of my books, this is including in the book Growing Free. There's a redux of Growing Free that mentions this. I can't remember the researcher's name, so I'm biffing on this. I just have to cite my own book, which is kind of tacky, but I'm going to cite my own book. So there was a scientist, an anthropologist, who went around to indigenous and horticultural communities and people living very traditional lifeways. And he did a survey, and he asked them all to rank the people in their community by their wealth. He wanted to know what things traditional human societies viewed as being wealthy and successful. And in a lot of cases, they didn't even necessarily have a word for wealth, because even the chieftain would often be just a little bit above everybody else. They were usually wealthy in symbolic things. Within a society, even a very egalitarian one, there gets to be a role for having some sort of system of hierarchy. Almost all humans agree or believe in some level of hierarchy and for authority, so that there's somebody to solve problems. And usually this person has forms of symbolic wealth and respect, so that everybody in the community will respect their arbitration. If two people in the community are having a disagreement and they're having a fight, then they need to go to somebody, a chieftain or a judge, who can say, well, this is the solution to this problem. And that person needs to be viewed as being wise and uplifted and invested in it in the community. So they will usually have a finer home of some form. They'll usually have finer jewelry that's often gifted to them by the community to raise them out and signal them out as a person of respect who can give them this sort of leadership, make difficult calls, hold the meetings, hold the community together. But that person in traditional societies is like just a tiny, tiny bit, raised up from everybody else. Almost all people live the same way. And even that person in most horticultural societies is going to contribute to the agricultural cycle and contribute to hunting and contribute to doing the work that feeds people. So they're all more equal in that kind of way. But there is going to be somebody there, we're all different. So different people have different attributes, and so the outcomes are going to be slightly different. There's still going to be forms of meritocracy within most indigenous societies. So they're just much more gentler than ours, where you have people who are now richer than all of the kings of all of world history combined. We have individuals today who have more wealth than all of the kings throughout history combined. And they live like a completely different species from the rest of us, right? And so our differences in terms of hierarchy are just, absurd compared to theirs. But what's really interesting is, so this anthropologist goes to all these communities and he asks them to, who's the wealthiest person in your community? Rank the wealthy and the poor people in your community. And this is the fascinating thing. 100% all of these traditional societies all did the same thing. They all spontaneously ranked the person in their community who is wealthiest in financial wealth as the most impoverished person. Within all of these communities that he visited, there were already people starting to adopt Western ways, who were getting loans, trying to buy up all the land, trying to get other people to work for them and exploit them to raise themselves up and to become part of the global sort of capitalist class, you know? And so these people were beginning to take on these ways. They were taking the loans from Westerners. They were the people who were being granted the ownership of the land so the land could be taxed. And there were the people cooperating with colonizers who came through. And these people often had ascended to a much higher level of wealth than other people. And or there might be people outside of the community, in nearby communities, who were adopting these sorts of ways of exploiting other people, of harming other people to raise themselves up. And all of these indigenous societies spontaneously ranked those people, wherever they were, the people who were hoarding wealth at the expense of their own empathy and at the expense of their community. They ranked them as the most impoverished people. Oftentimes, they would be ranked, or always, they would be ranked lower than people who were truly impoverished because they were no longer able to work or they were physically incapacitated. They thought it was worse to be somebody who was impoverished in the soul than to be someone who was impoverished physically. And they thought those people were the thing. And every language has a word for that kind of person, comparable or in some cases related to the English word miser. A miser is someone who is rich at the expense of true wealth. They have hoarded financial capital in exclusion of the things that would make their lives truly wealthy. So think about that. And by the way, it's a great conversation to be having today as we talk about permaculture's most powerful tools, because the real goal of permaculture is to look at what we want in a deep level. Because if you don't know what you want, how will you ever get there? So think about that deeply. Do you want to create the kind of life where you have hoarded financial wealth at the expense of spiritual wealth and relational wealth and all these, and natural wealth, and having a beautiful environment around you and a rich ecosystem that is healthy? Or do you want to find ways to invest in creating true wealth and abundance for yourself? What does that mean, and what does that look like in your landscape and your life and your garden? If you want to participate now and you want to throw some ideas into the chat, I'd appreciate that. What does true wealth, a truly wealthy life, look like to you? What would be things within your life that make you feel truly wealthy? For me, having space for community within my landscape, within my garden, is very important. A place to share music, I'm a musician, a place to share music and art and culture, community itself, a diet free from poison 1000%. And when you can look out your window and look out your door and see your friends and see them healthy and see your own food and know that your food is free from poison, that is true wealth. And believe me, when you have and you create a garden where you look out and you know there's 100% complete possible diet there for you, and it's all grown without poison and plastic, your stress levels just go down. Health, happiness, being stress-free, time for idle contemplation. Yes, I wanted to be talking about gardening today, and this conversation with you guys led me in a slightly different direction than I wanted to go in, and that's fine because we have time for this life-enriching discussion and time for idle contemplation and for conversation and finding what truly enriches us together. Thank you for those suggestions. I appreciate you all. And thank you for joining this conversation. Talking about permaculture's most powerful tools. And overall, permaculture's most powerful tool is design, looking deeply at what we want and trying to figure out how to get there. And this is where you really see a permaculture garden is different than just a regular vegetable garden or an organic vegetable garden, because an organic vegetable garden is trying to grow organic produce. That's great, right? But a permaculture garden is trying to grow true wealth and all of these things that will give us a true wealthy life. That time for contemplation, that relaxed lifestyle, health, happiness, an opportunity for positive exercise that isn't struggle and strife, clean, healthy food that is filled with flavor and nutrient dense, a relationship with nature. There's another thing that we talk about a lot in permaculture. So permaculture came from this idea of the pattern language design, which we're going to be talking about next Tuesday at 7 p.m. here, both places. And you can find me on TikTok and Instagram. Next Saturday, 11 o'clock, again, we'll be back. We'll be talking about pattern design and pattern genius, one of my favorite topics in permaculture because of all of this. And getting back to it, this is what makes permaculture different to other approaches to gardening. We're not just looking about how to grow produce in isolation. We're talking about how we create a human habitat. How do we create a human habitat that will support a truly wealthy, beautiful life? And within the book A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander and his other books, A Timeless Way of Building, he talks about how we humans have an instinct, a fundamental instinct for recognizing a wealthy ecosystem. Imagine you go back in time to the days when humans were first leaving Africa, spreading out around the globe. And you were with your family unit, your tribe, and you're migrating to a new place, looking for a new place to build a home that will have a lot of opportunities for you. And you go through a mountain pass, and through the mountain pass you see a valley below, and the valley below is a valley that's kept free from trees by periodic flooding, and the periodic flooding makes it really rich and fertile, and so the soil is fertile. And you look at this, and there are flowers blooming everywhere, and flowers are very important to us because a lot of forbs, flowering plants, are food plants. They produce fruit, and they produce tubers that are rich in energy. They produce all these good things, right? And the hillsides surrounding are all filled with flowers too, and it's spring, and the whole system is filled with flowers. The fruit trees around the hillsides, or the flowers around the fruit trees show us that there are fruits, right? Probably apples and plums and pears, something like this. Persimmons. And then in the valley, all those flowers show us there's potentially food there, and that if there's a lot of flowers, it means the soil is rich as well. So you come to this, and there are hills that also provide a security and safety from the back, and we can look out and see this beautiful valley that's all flowering, and instantly this view has spiritual resonance, Have you ever seen an ecosystem like this? Have you ever been to a place where you just see this view and you go, right here, this is beautiful. This is home. Christopher Alexander said that all of us humans have this innate instinct for recognizing a place where we will be cared for, where the ecosystem will help us grow a truly wealthy life and a healthy community. And oh, need help with irrigation. We're going to talk about that. In fact, in 3 weeks, I have a whole class on irrigation design and water design. So come back in 3 weeks, and we will have a whole class where we talk about where I'm going to stay on topic and not get off on all this other stuff. And we're going to talk about water design. So check out the schedule. I will show you the schedule again before we finish up here today, so you can see some of the topics that are going to be coming up in the future. So anyway, all animals actually have this. So for example, birds in the sky. Have you ever seen the beautiful pattern of birds as they fly, and it makes this almost beautiful mathematical sort of wave to it? Scientists have studied this and found that the birds actually have a built-in instinct for staying a certain distance from each other, and it just feels good. And so and the certain mathematics of how they fly and how they stick together ends up forming that pattern, and it's really beautiful to see. With mice are programmed to stick close to walls. Have you ever noticed that? If you ever had a mouse in your house, they stick close to the walls and run close to places like that. They try to stay near places where they will be safe, little nooks and crannies. And when they're in those places, their bodies feel good. Their bodies send them a signal going, this feels right. This feels safe. And we humans have the same thing, a built-in instinct for understanding and seeing healthy, rich soil, a healthy, diverse, abundant ecosystem. And when we're in that place, everything feels right. Everything feels better. And there are all sorts of studies on this too, on how it impacts human behavior. When you're in that kind of place and you create that kind of environment, crime goes down. Addiction goes away. In fact, have you ever heard of the Rat City experiment? There's this experiment where they take rats and they make this like Rat City that is just like a horrible, destitute place to be, with no beauty to it, nothing that feeds the rats, that stimulates them creatively, where they can't do their normal rodent behaviors that rodents evolved to do: exploring, digging, collecting things, the things that rodents like to do that make them feel good, and an environment that feels good to rodents. And so you can take rodents, and they would give them addictive drugs, and or food, give them too much food. And when they put them in Rat City, in a place where they have easy access to food, but they don't have any of those things that feed their fundamental rat behaviors, that feed them and make them feel good about their rat lives, then they become addicted. They become addicted to food, they become addicted to drugs, addiction happens. When you take those same rats, even ones that are already addicted, they can be addicted already, chemically and physically, and you move them to an environment where they experience a beautiful, healthy rat habitat, a rat habitat, then the addiction goes away. When they can be placed in a place where they feel that resonance, that they're in a healthy ecosystem, they don't have to explore and escape to go someplace else. all of those negative behaviors decline and go away. And we know the same thing with with humans. We know that in areas where there's high crime, if you plant trees, crime goes down. Isn't that wild? That's like a proven fact. Oh, Secret of Nim. It, this is, I think that's yeah, the Rats of Nim is actually based on the Rat City experiment, by the way. Yeah, so that is that like book and that cartoon and all that are actually based on that. Your friend says all the time that nature is therapy. It's 100% true. And again, this goes back to our ancient wisdom traditions. In the Tao Te Ching and in the Buddhist texts, when people have a disease, when people are sick, one of the first prescriptions that the doctors would recommend is go spend some time in nature. The ancient Chinese cure for poor eyesight, this is incredible, was when people would have eyesight problems, they didn't have glasses, they'd say, go spend a few months in nature. Don't read, don't take books, go and spend some time in a beautiful natural habitat. Your vision cleared up. If only we could all spend our time that way these days. And nature became a therapy of all different kinds. These days there's a huge fad called forest bathing. Forest bathing. Yes, absolutely. You breathe in the natural phenols produced by plants. These are incredibly health enhancing for us. They reduce our stress. They make us relax. They give us this profound sense of spiritual wealth and spiritual resonance when we're in a place like that. And this goes much further than this too. Your garden has become a neighborhood asset. People stop by to visit and enjoy. I love that so much. Mine too. And I try to create gardens that invite people into them, and where people come through and maybe spend a little bit of time. And this is the thing here. Let's go. Let's take this to a new level yet again. When we go back to that ecosystem and you go through the mountain pass and you see this ecosystem that is filled with biodiversity. If you've watched some of my videos before, you've heard me say that biodiversity is the big key to a healthy ecosystem. In fact, ecosystem health was defined by the early ecologist Aldo Leopold as a system growing in biodiversity over time and physical abundance, but also biodiversity over time. Modern ecologists have adapted this slightly to recognize things like that a desert can be a healthy ecosystem and part of a broader ecosystem, even though it has low biodiversity, right? So it's not always 100% true, but still, this Aldo Leopold definition of a healthy ecosystem, I may have disappeared for just a second. I'm back. So the Aldo Leopold definition is still very powerful within ecology. It's just been adapted a little bit. And his idea here is biodiversity. And here's the thing. When you have high biodiversity, then when it comes to things like disease, high biodiversity of plants is what gives high biodiversity of the soil. Each plant has its own associated organisms that live in the soil. So when you have multiple plants, roots in the same foot of soil, the biodiversity of the soil community doesn't just go up in a linear way, it goes up exponentially, because plant A has 10 different organisms that are associated with it, and plant B has 10 organisms that are associated with it. But all those organisms have different organisms that are associated with them. And those organisms have different associated organisms with them that are predators or prey. And so the more plants you have in an ecosystem, the more the biodiversity goes up exponentially. When you have that situation, if you have a pathogen, a disease organism, then there's going to be something that competes with it or eats it, right? So oftentimes the solution to a disease problem is biodiversity. And this has been proven. There are studies in Germany and Poland where they have fields where the fields were diseased with potato blight. And you couldn't grow potatoes in these fields because they used to grow potatoes there for so many generations that the soils were just loaded with the pathogens, with the disease organism. Here's what the scientists found. If they increase the biodiversity of the system at a certain point, there's enough biodiversity that the pathogen is still there. This completely changes our whole old school master gardener paradigm, where we say try to keep disease-free garden, right? The whole thing was try to keep a disease-free garden. Take away any matter, have a clean garden all the time. This science points in completely the opposite direction. In this view, the biodiversity, if there's enough biodiversity, there will be an organism that will compete with the disease organism or be a predator to that disease organism at a certain level of complexity. And they found this is true. So once you get the biodiversity up in that potato field, the blight organism is still there. We didn't get rid of the blight organism, but now it's not out of balance. In a healthy ecosystem, it doesn't get out of balance, and all of a sudden you can grow potatoes in the soil with potato blight. By the way, we know now this is why crop rotation works. You're changing the biodiversity in the system, increasing the biodiversity in the field by rotating your crops, and so the disease organism is probably there at some level, but you've brought it back into balance. Now, let's kick this into a whole new area. The same thing is true of humans. I've got 3% left in my battery here, so I'm going to finish up with this story and say, then I will see you on Tuesday. We'll be back to talk about more of this. If you want to go deeper into this topic of permaculture's most powerful tools, check out my link tree, check out my webpage. This afternoon, I'm going to have details about more details about the class and what you get when you get involved in it. But yes, I'm a guy with a highly efficient garden, and that's what I'm on here talking about today. Trying to set up raised vegetable beds with native perennials. Let's do it. That'll be great for your garden. The more biodiversity, the better. Okay, 2% left. Join me next Tuesday and Saturday. I'll be back here 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, 11 Eastern Time on Saturday. We're going to keep doing this whole permaculture design certificate course. You're going to have the best garden ever this year, okay? Last idea. So this is the magic. We walk into this, we create a garden. A permaculture garden is more than just a vegetable garden. It's a garden that's filled with biodiversity, a garden that supports true wealth and abundance. It's filled with biodiversity. The same thing applies to humans. The biodiversity resiliency principle states the greater number of species there are in the ecosystem, the more resistance to pest and disease it confers on the individuals, and we're one of those individuals. We know now that experiencing interacting with an environment that's rich in biodiversity helps us be free from pest and disease too, which is why things like forest bathing work and are so health enhancing. So when you create a permaculture garden, it is not just growing healthy produce. It is a whole health enhancing experience holistically. So that's what I would like to help you create this year. Keep coming back here Tuesdays and Saturdays. We're going to be having a full permaculture design certificate course. Check out the schedule. It's going to be posted on TikTok and Instagram. Thank you everybody for joining me, and have a great week, all right? Have a great finish to your weekend. Was wondering what I'd suggest for raised bed soil? I've got a whole thing about this in my books, and I've got videos about it too if you look for them, or come back next time and I'll answer that question. I'm out of battery, guys. I keep going, but I'm out. Hey, thank you, everybody. Take it easy.